Hi, I was wondering, James, if you had any advice for the novel writing format, short stories, just any advice in general you have about that?
Um, well, I suppose, yeah. I mean, the two are distinct, aren't they? Short stories and novels have different
Prose in general.
prose in general. Okay. Wow.
Very, very broad question.
I tell you what. Let me. Well, unless you want to speak, we'll have a think about that and come back to that one. Okay.
You can think about that for a moment.
Yeah,
actually, I mean, as an undergraduate, I wrote lots of short stories, and I had a short story published in the Transformers anthology. The thing about short stories is, and this is kind of awesome, there are no rules. There are no rules to writing a short story. I mean, there are grammatical rules, fine, whatever, but in terms of structure, in terms of characterization, in terms of length, it's very much a blank canvas. It's whatever you want to do. So I would recommend reading a lot of stories, and I would recommend reading a lot of novels. I'd recommend reading a lot, but more than anything else, the way to learn to write is to write, and the way to learn to write short stories is write a lot of them.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly endorse all of that. Absolutely, it's good advice, and I think if you're thinking if you want to write prose full stop, then fine. If you might want to read a lot of short stories and a lot of novels and novellas, and see if you can determine what are the characteristics that make them distinct from each other. Because there are people out there that if you like, operate almost entirely within the short story genre. That's their chosen way of telling stories. I mean, generally speaking, it stands to reason. You're gonna have a fewer characters, and potentially it's going to be potentially less ambitious in scope with a short story. In terms of writing, the act of writing and crafting prose stories, I suppose be careful not to overwrite is a general rule. Obviously, go back and reread and edit and see what you can take away. It's often an act of taking things away, actually, that you realise are redundant to the story, and things become simpler rather than more complicated. Style is an entirely subjective thing. Okay, so this isn't there's no hard and fast rules, but a good general rule I've learnt over the years is to stay away from adverbs. When you're setting dialogue onto the page, you do get some writers, usually when they're starting off, that will I'm thinking of an example now, but there'll be a line of dialogue, and then it's sort of he said sullenly, for example, and then you'll have each, every three out of every 4 lines of dialogue will have this adverb at the end, and often that's often the first thing you realise you can take away. If the story is dialogue heavy and things.
If you say he hissed, make sure there are syllabants in this. Don't do that. Cannot be hissed.
Yeah.
Can't. J.K. Rowling, in the Harry Potter books, there are times she has people hissing, and it's like, I don't see a single S in here, there's no Z in here, I'm trying to work it out, but not quite happening. Whereas Slytherin, you can absolutely hiss. Oh, yes, when you say he barked, there's always some smartass out there who's going to be like, don't do that, But, so use that kind of stuff sparingly. My advice is, I was the kind of person who loved vocabulary builders in high school. I loved these really long, ostentatious words, and, I love being garrulous and all kinds of, you come upon these words that were just absolutely extraordinary and wonderful. Don't use those when you're writing if it's going to stop your reader. The whole point is to make the reader forget that you're there. So don't try to impress them with your vocabulary if it's going to stop them from reading.
Yeah, that's good advice. I remember, I don't think the name will mean anything to many people in the room, but there's a British sort of comedian and satirist called Alexis Sale, and he was sort of critiquing John Updike's work, and he said, I don't need 3 pages to tell me what a spoon looks like. So, that will work for some people. That's florid and intense, over descriptive. Maybe actually Updike's not the best example, but the point still stands that You know, you can if it's about telling a story, and ultimately that's what prose is. If it's about telling a story, then I think you'd be surprised how much you can strip away. And I really like what you said there about you want the authorial voice to be invisible. You don't want to. Reading should be like reading and not telling. You don't want to be have things thrown at you, and a very florid, overwrought style can seem very artificial. And the artifice is all that you pick up on. You find yourself admiring the writing rather than being carried along in the story.
Yeah, be prepared to, when you're writing your first draft, just let yourself be free. Just don't edit yourself. Just get it out there, and be prepared to cut a lot of what you've written. A lot of it's the art of, you have to kill your own children. Just be prepared to throw stuff over the side, stuff that you love, stuff that you think is, this is fantastic. Is it moving the story along? Yeah. Is it helping you, or is it just there for its own sake?
Yeah, that's good. And I need to say, let's go on record right now. I haven't always followed my own advice here, and certainly, Eugenesis, which was the novel length Chomsky's book. There's overwritten pages in there. In fact, there's two versions of it. The second version, it was an unofficial, not-for-profit thing before I became a pro, and it was released as a hard copy. It was talking 15 years ago or more, and then there was the opportunity to put it online, and so I took that opportunity to go through it again, and I took pages and pages. The amount of editing that it went through, it lost about 50 pages overall, and I think was better for it. So I'm not. I've tried to follow my own advice because I've had to over the years.
I write screenplays as well as teleplays, and with a screenplay, I will find when I'm through with it, I'll go through and start editing stuff, and I will lose 5 pages without breaking a sweat. The story has to keep moving, and if something's there and it's not moving things along, if it's not advancing the characters, if it's not advancing the story, if it's just there because you kind of like it, it's got to go. Yeah,
that's a really good. I think the kill your darlings thing is really true. And you'll know if this is the third pass of editing, and there's a phrase, a sentence or a paragraph in there, you'll know deep down it's there because you're impressed with yourself for writing it. and that take it out.